All right, we are back talking about Survivor 41. We just had episode 9, and in a repeat of Ghost Island and Island of the Idols, we had the team twist in the post merge where the 10 remaining players were broken up into teams of 5. Each team ran its own immunity challenge, and each team went to tribal council and voted out one of their own. And again, this was a pretty big episode, not just gameplay wise, but also in terms of the eliminations. And obviously, with this episode, we lost a pretty big Edgic front runner so far in the season. And I feel like with that, we kind of have another jumbling of sorts where, we're still not sure exactly where the season is going to go. It's very unclear now what's going to happen now, as I feel like the 8 remaining players still in the game all have massive flaws to their edit, which makes it very interesting to assess their likelihood of winning. But like all these other videos, I will be going through the 8 remaining players, as well as talk about the 2 eliminated players, talk about their games, before moving on to the 8 remaining players and determining which of them have the best shot of winning. And I know this will be interesting. So, starting off the list at number 10, we have the first boot from the double tribal, and that is Nasir. Now, I'll admit, I wasn't expecting Nasir to be the most likely boot coming into this episode. I felt like Ricard was a more likely boot, but again, Nasir going here with his idol in his pocket didn't surprise me too much. I did mention in the previous episode how I thought Nasir mentioning his idol in confessional led me to believe that he could have been blindsided with an idol in his pocket. And in this episode, he once again got a confessional talking about that. So it's not too surprising that he ends up going out with his idol in his pocket. There isn't too much to say about him, like in the challenge. Like, obviously, before the challenge, like, Chantelle was really gunning for uh, Erika to go home. And then after the challenge, there was a bit of a back and forth with Heather before Ricard is shown being the one to convince Chantelle that Nasir is the one to go. Although by the end of it, we find out that Ricard actually voted for Heather, while Chantelle used her extra vote to cast one vote for Nasir and the other for Heather as a way to counteract a potential idol play. While Erica and Heather were the ones being perceived as being a duo, they're the ones that really cast the votes against Nasir to force that tie. And of course, on the revote, Nasir is voted out in decisive action. So overall, like, Nasir played an interesting game. I mean, obviously he was on Luvu, so there wasn't too much to really see of him in the pre-merge. Although we saw in the pre-merge how he was kind of on the outs. I mean, we saw him getting targeted early on by Sydney. She got a lot of content pre-merge talking about Sydney, sort of relaying information to Danny and Deshawn about how Nasir wanted to target them. Nasir also supposedly didn't have the best relationship with Heather either. Like, it's been implied that Nasir probably could have targeted Sydney at first, but then later on, once he aligns with Danny and Deshawn, he might have been more open to targeting Erica, but obviously he never went to tribal pre-merge, so it's not too clear how that would have shaken out. But I feel like regardless, it's pretty clear that he was kind of on the outs in the pre-merge. While he does align with Dan Deshawn in the pre-merge, like, it's not exactly that well insulated. It's more so out of Danny worrying about all the men being voted off in the other tribes. So that was sort of a way to consolidate the men's power. And in the merge, like, again, he's part of this Luvu slash Ua slash Liana majority alliance that really take control in these early votes. And I would say that if it wasn't for this team twist, he probably would have survived another couple of rounds, potentially. I feel like the way the team shook out really set him up for a blindside here, especially considering the fact that you have Erica and Heather as a duo. Erica was the initial target by Chantelle, only for that to be deflected once Erica won immunity. And you have Ricard and Chantelle on the other side being kind of a duo. I mean, it's kind of weird how they've been set up as having a conflict, but in more recent episodes, they've been working together. So, really, I mean, you could have said that Nasir could have been the swing vote in the situation. But the fact that, like, we saw Erica and Heather ultimately take this shot, take advantage of this opportunity to blindside Nasir with an idol in his pocket is something. I mean, I didn't think Nasir was going to win necessarily. I felt like he probably would have made a relatively deep run, assuming he was able to survive those first few votes. possibly win some immunity challenges along the way, and then ultimately get targeted due to being too big of a threat. Now, I feel like again, like he didn't win as many immunity challenges to warrant such a threat. I feel like a lot of that comes from just him being very likable, plus him having an idol, of course. But even outside of that, I feel like if it wasn't for this teen twist and the opportunity kind of presented itself, I feel like Nasir might have lasted one or two more rounds. So I liked Nasir a lot on the season. I didn't think he was going to win, but I feel like he played okay. Wasn't in the best position throughout, but I liked him on the season. So at least there's that. Now we have the other boot from last night's double tribal, and we have Evie. Now I know this isn't going to age well, but obviously last week I had Evie at number one. Although I think I acknowledged that even putting them at number one, I recognized that they were in the greatest danger from a game position, and they would need to either win immunity or cause some major flip in order to survive this next round. Really, the reason I had Evie as high as I did last week was because I feel like of the remaining players, especially once Tiffany left, that Evie had the most substance there for a traditional winner's edit. And still stand by that. I feel like throughout the season, they justified themselves as a Edgic frontrunner. Now, obviously, with this teen twist, they were put in a pretty bad position to where, again, they're still in the minority along with Xander. Both of them were placed on the same team, and really they didn't have too much of a shot. Now, the episode did reestablish the Deshaun Evie relationship that was set up way back in episode two, I think. Obviously, Evie talked a lot back then about wanting to work with Deshaun, even though Deshaun didn't really want to work with them. And I took that to be a pretty big red flag. I mean, and honestly, in hindsight, I mean, like seeing that being reestablished in this episode probably was a sign that Evie was going to go home in this episode. I'll admit that I didn't see it at the time. I guess part of that was me wanting to think that based on traditional Edgic that Evie would somehow make this situation work for her. But obviously in the long run that didn't end up happening. But like I said, I mean, they were put in a pretty bad position based on the way the teams shifted out. I mean, obviously in the challenge they lost, but Xander won, which, teed up the possibility that Xander could play his idol for them. Obviously, they really lobbied hard to get Deshaun and Danny on board to blindside Liana. And I honestly felt that based on the edit, I felt like there was at least a chance that Liana could have been blindsided here, but obviously it wasn't meant to be. And to be fair, I think it makes more sense from a game perspective for Evie to be taken out here. I mean, while Deshaun is someone that has been setting up a rivalry against Chantelle and Liana's taking on Liana would have been a way of weakening Chantelle's influence on the game. I feel like it just wasn't the correct time for him to do so. Especially once they got the tribal and saw that Nasir was on the jury, he probably figured that he could afford to wait one more round to take one last hit for on behalf of the majority alliance, not have to take out Liana, someone that's technically a part of the cookout style alliance. And then at final eight is time to flip, really maybe then to get uh, Xander on board to really cause a flip there. So from a game perspective, I can see why Evie was voted out there. Although I will admit I was a bit not unexpected by it. So overall, I think Evie played a pretty good game, at least in the pre-merge. I mean, they were in a pretty strong position during their pre-merge. They had very strong relationships with most of their tribe. I mean, there's Tiffany, of course, who saw them as her number one. There was Liana, of course, who also had a decent relationship with them. And of course, there was Xander, who, despite being on the bottom, really came to view Evie as his closest ally, even if they weren't as loyal to him in return. And even among the eliminated players, I mean, you have Voce, who saw Evie as being a good number for him. I mean, really, they Evie was really well positioned throughout the pre-merge, and I felt like that was setting them up pretty well. I feel like that was also backed up by a pretty strong edit, although I did note how it was a bit too much in the first two episodes to where they could possibly have been set up as a decoy winner. And really coming into the merge, I mean, really the numbers just didn't shake out for them. I mean, they really tried to set up that uh, cross tribal alliance with Deshaun, but Deshaun never really took that. He felt like there were better options there. And of course, like once Evie got down the numbers, like they were just getting picked off for a while. Now, I will admit that they did at least try to get back into the majority somehow. They were trying to flip. They were trying to like separate themselves from the rest of Yase in order to reduce their threat level. But in the end, I mean, despite there being a number of cracks on the majority alliance, that majority alliance was able to stick together at least long enough to pick off Evie. So I guess you can fault them for that. But again, I feel like Evie played a pretty good game on the whole. I mean, obviously they came into the season with like that tagline from their preseason interview of how they hate men. I mean, obviously that wasn't a great look, but I think they really demonstrated themselves to be really good strategically and very good socially. Again, they were very well positioned in the pre-merge, and I feel like if they had gotten the numbers in the post-merge, then I felt like they could have been an end game contender. So again, I was impressed by Evie this season. All right, now moving on to the 8 players that are still in the game, like and how likely it is that they are to win the game. And at number 8, we have the person with the least likely chance in my eyes, and it's the same person as last week. We have Heather. Now, Heather has been getting more content lately, and obviously that's good. I mean, it's better late than never, but I feel like it's a bit too little, too late. Let's break down what we got from her. So I guess the big thing is that we saw her being established as being part of a duo with Erika. We see early on in the episode how Chantelle was really trying to target Erika and Heather at this point as she sees them as being a big threat. And Nasir even talked about in his exit interview about how Erika and Heather were close from early on, but obviously only now is when we're seeing it play out on the screen. So obviously Chantel's initial plan is to target Erica in that regard, but then once a teen twist happens and once Erica wins immunity, then her focus really shifts towards Heather. And, it seems for a bit that they could be leaning towards Heather. I mean, I didn't really think was going to happen. I think they would be cognizant enough to realize that Heather just isn't as big as of a threat, and they realize that they have an opportunity to take out a bigger threat in this tier. Now, yet it did imply to a certain extent that maybe Ricard was behind this move against Nasir. I mean, but then once the votes actually happen, I mean, we see Erica and Heather vote for Nasir, Ricard votes for Heather, and then Chantel uses her extra vote, but splits it between one vote on Heather and the other on Nasir, causing a tie. And obviously on the revote, they're gonna vote out Nasir because I feel like once you cast that vote onto Nasir, especially with him having an idol, then it would make sense to follow through on that and actually get him out of the game with his idol in his pocket. So I didn't think Heather was going home here, but still the fact that she was being targeted here wasn't particularly great. Now I will say that at least we're getting more context behind her game now with her having this close relationship with Erica, but I still don't think she's going to win the game. I mean, I think she'll probably make at least final 6, maybe. I could even see her getting to the final tribal council, but I don't think she's gonna win. I mean, even based on what we've seen from exit interviews, like we hear people like Sydney and now Nasir talking about how they don't particularly like Heather that much, and I don't think that bodes particularly well for her jury chances. Like if she gets there, and of course the edit just isn't there to justify a win. So I have Heather here, number 8. Okay, it's time for a blind side now. The second lowest person on this list is not Erica. I decided to put Danny at number 7 on this list. And again, like this may come as a bit of a surprise, but I just feel like at this point in the season, I don't think Danny is going to win. I mean, the fact that he's gotten so little content in this post merge is a bit surprising to me. And I think it's pretty bad on his part. I mean, I mentioned in the past how in the pre merge, a lot of his content was pretty circumstantial. It seemed like he was only shown when he needed to be shown, and in this post merge, he just hasn't shown up at all. I mean, at least on screen. Now, obviously, gameplay wise, he's in a decent position for the time being. I mean, he's still in the majority alliance. I mean, he has his very close bond with Deshaun. in this episode, he was with Deshaun on during the teen twist, and I feel like he was the one that was really pushing for Deshaun to really stick the to the plan, to stick to the majority line and take out Evie, save Liana for another day. Like, obviously we didn't see that on screen, but my sense is that's how it happened. That's what motivated Deshaun to really stick with the majority alliance, at least for one more round. But again, aside from that, like, we just don't see anything from him. And I'm just very concerned about Danny at this point. Now, again, I mentioned in the past how it's possible he could be targeted based on his physical strength. However, again, we just haven't really seen that at all. He hasn't been that competitive in challenges, so I guess that reduces his threat level to an extent. But I feel like next round, I think I'm assuming that if the flip happens in the next round, that Danny will probably be there with Deshaun, hopefully, to flip against, the Chantelle, Ricard, Liana contingent. And again, he'll probably survive the next couple of rounds because of that. But I just don't see him winning at this point. And his lack of content in the post merge has been very disappointing to me. Plus, I feel like other people have been moving up a bit. So I decided to put Danny at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and here at number 6 we have Liana. Now, again, I kind of talked Liana into the ground a bit over the last couple of weeks, talking about how her failure to play the knowledge is power advantage correctly was kind of a death sentence to her winner edit, and I feel like again that kind of largely holds. I feel like this week really perpetuated the her rivalry with Xander and how she really wanted to see Xander go out. During the challenge, like, we see her wanting him to lose. Back at camp, we get that kind of ridiculous moment where she asks him to give her his idol. Which is like, there's no chance of him ever doing that. So it's kind of ridiculous that she even asked for that. The fact that the show depicted that was kind of ridiculous and kind of undermining her there. Obviously through the teen twist, like, we get her pitted kind of against Evie and Xander along with Danny and Deshaun. And, there was a very real chance that she could have gone home tonight. Seeing how the votes played out, with the episode kind of reestablishing the relationship between Deshaun and Evie, there was a very real chance that, that contingent could have gone together and really flipped the game right then and there. Couple in the fact that Liana's kind of been a second in command to Chantelle as of lately, and we've seen Deshaun really have this feud with Chantelle. It's very possible that, like, Deshaun could have taken this opportunity to, like, flip the game right then and there to take out one of Chantel's closest allies. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, and I actually think it's probably better for Deshaun's game if he waited at least one more round before taking that shot. But still, based on the edit, there was a very real chance that Liana could have gone home there, which obviously isn't great. But aside from that, you have her continuing this feud with Xander, and I feel like the show has made it clear over and over again that she is on the losing side of that. And I feel like when it comes down to it, Xander will ultimately outlast and probably even be the one to take out Liana. So obviously none of that bodes particularly well for her. And I feel like with this flip coming relatively soon, I feel like it's only a matter of time before Liana's game comes to an end. So I feel like I had to put her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and this person has moved up a bit since last week. I still don't think this person's winning, but I decided that they had a pretty good episode, and at least enough to put them above the other people, and we have Ricard. Now, again, I feel like we're learning a bit more about Ricard as the season goes along. I think the biggest thing to really come out of this episode is his relationship with Chantel. We saw, like, in the episodes right before the merge how they've been getting into a feud. They're, like, the fact that they dedicated, scenes in two separate episodes to Ricard and Chantel having this argument over the extra vote did lead me to believe that they would be a fracture of some sort, and that would eventually lead to them possibly turning on each other. But I feel like now, now that we're in this post merge, it seems more and more that Ricard does seem to be staying in Chantel's corner. the two seem to be working very well together, and I find that particularly interesting. Now, obviously, on this vote, they were put together on the same team for the teen twist. I mean, and then obviously they were pitted against another duo. Chantelle wanted to take out Erica, like at first, but then Erika won immunity, causing Heather to become their target. But then we see Ricard really be the one to pitch this idea of wanting to blindside Nasir with his idol in his pocket. And while Erika and Heather are the ones to actually cast those votes, like Ricard is the one to vote for Heather, while Chantel splits the vote there to really cause a tie there. And obviously on the revote, that in turn causes Nasir to go home. Now, I feel like that was a relatively good move for Ricard. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yes, it demonstrates Ricard's ability to think and really take out big threats in the game. Although I do question whether it'll actually work out for him in the long run. I mean, yes, on one hand, like I mentioned, how it seems like these days he seems to be more and more in Chantel's corner based on recent episodes. But I do wonder if this is him trying to possibly weaken Chantel to a certain extent. Obviously, we see in the episode that Nasir is someone that was very loyal to Chantel. So the fact that he's the one to take him out, kind of weakens Chantel. So it's just a matter of determining whether or not this is a good move or a bad move for Ricard's game. I say that because if Ricard is still perceived as being close to Chantel even after this, then when the flip happens, he could be set up as being one of those first targets. And obviously, if that's the case, then voting out Nasir was a big mistake. But if what we saw right before the merge, that bickering was truly being a setup to a split happening, then him taking out Nasir right now is actually a great move for Ricard, as it could allow him to flip to the Danny and Deshaun things when a flip does inevitably happen. There's definitely merit to either side. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And aside from that, I feel like Ricard has been positioning himself relatively well. The fact that he was being included on the Cookout Alliance despite not being an African American or an African Canadian player is somewhat impressive on this part. Aside from that, he also got some personal content this episode talking about his hard of hearing. And honestly, I thought that was being set up for a boot. I mentioned in the last installment of this that thought Ricard was going to be the next boot, but there was just nothing there. I did think that that personal content was being the setup for that, but now it could be a bit more interesting. It's possible that that just could have been thrown in there, but regardless, I still don't think Ricard's winning the game. I think he will be taken out relatively soon. Assuming that he's still loyal to Chantel, then he'll probably be picked off by Deshaun before going for Chantel head forthright. And if he is part of this insurrection to turn on Chantel, then I think he'll probably make final six, final five, maybe. But I don't think he's winning the game. I don't think he's getting to the end either. So I decided to have Ricard a little higher based on the fact that he had this good episode, but nothing too impressive in my eyes. Now we're moving on to number four, and I can't believe this person is this high. If you told me before Tiffany went out, or even before Evie went out, that this person would be as high as they are, I would have had trouble believing it. But I feel like at this point in the season, without there being a clear Edgic frontrunner, I feel like Erica has to be number four. Now, again, I've talked multiple times about how Erica's edit has just not been there. The pre-merge, like she hasn't got too much content. Her premiere wasn't too bad, but outside of that, she's gotten very little content outside of like later on that pre-merge where she was being targeted due to being a threat. And in this episode, we did see her being targeted as being a threat. She was the initial target before winning immunity. And we also get the establishment in this episode that her and Heather are part of this duo that people find threatening. And I found that particularly interesting. Now, again, in the moment, I didn't think this was too much. We've seen in the past how people don't get too much screen time until all of a sudden we hear them being mentioned as this big threat, to which they are shortly taken out. Now, I didn't think Erica was going home in this episode, but I still found that particularly interesting. But what I will say is, well, like at this point in the season, I mean, we saw Erica being mentioned as a threat in the pre-merge. At the merge, I mean, she got a lot of content there. I mean, although a lot of that was circumstantial, in this episode, she was mentioned again as being a threat. And I feel like the fact that we got that establishment earlier of her being a threat, only to get that again here, leads me to believe that she is a decent player, definitely one that has potential to do well in the game. And it's possible that with this flip that I believe is going to happen, that Erica will play a key role in that flip happening. But, again, I mean, before this past week, I would not have considered her as being this high. I mean, and really, even now, I mean, I don't think this episode was the greatest for her. It's just a matter of other people moving down and there just not being a clear front runner at this point ethically. I mean, literally every single person left in this game has some serious flaws to their edit, which makes this list kind of hard to put together. But I feel like Erica just has enough there to where she could jump out and be a surprise to people in the end game. That's the main thing holding her here now. Now, obviously, if she goes home next week or if it turns out she's just not that big of a player, then obviously she will have to move down. But for now, I mean, while the season seems to be in flux still, and a lot of what I'm speculating just hasn't materialized at this moment, I feel like Erica is probably a interesting pick to have here at number 4. So there's that. Now we're moving on to number 3, and again, I mean, I don't think this person is winning, but considering the rest of the field, I had to put her as high as she is, but we have Chantelle. Now, obviously, we have another big episode for Chantelle, with her being involved in the center of the majority alliance for the most part. I mean, early on, we see her wanting to target Erika, but obviously that changes once a teen twist and Erika winning immunity comes into play. After that, she's shown wanting to target Heather as she cites her and Erika as being part of a duo. She wants to break that up, weaken that to an extent. But then we see Ricard and really go out of there to try and convince her to target Nasir instead. And through that, we obviously at Tribal, Erica and Heather do vote for Nasir. Ricard votes for Heather. And then Chantel does something pretty interesting where she decides to use her extra vote to split it so that she casts one vote on Heather and the other on Nasir, causing a 3-3 tie. And obviously on the revote, I mean, obviously you had to get rid of Nasir at that point, as if you keep him around for another round, then he'll probably be more incentivized to use his idol. So there's that at least. However, I will say that getting rid of Nasir here was probably a big mistake for Chantel. Now, I understand why she decided to use the extra vote. She probably did it just in case Nasir decided to play his idol. She wanted to ensure that even if Nasir played his idol, that Heather would still go home in that case, as opposed to either Ricard or herself. However, I still think getting rid of Nasir here is a big mistake on her end, as we hear her say that she's loyal to Nasir, and we hear Nasir say in turn that he's loyal to her. So by getting rid of Nasir here, she's getting rid of one of her own numbers, especially one that probably would have been more loyal to her. And considering now that we have this potential flip happening with Deshaun down the line, this whole feud happening, I can see in the next round Chantel losing one of her closest allies. I mean, I don't think Chantel herself will go home here, but I can see either Liana or Ricard going home in the next episode, which obviously would be very bad for Chantel's game. I really think that we're getting now to the point where if this slip were to happen, that Chantel will lose the battle, and through that, she'll lose her closest allies, and then before long, she herself will be taken out. So I don't think she's poised particularly well to win this game. Like I said, her decision to get rid of Nasir, or at least not do much to stop it from happening, is still a pretty big mistake in my eyes. So again, I know that she's been a big player throughout the season, and I guess the reason I still have her at number 3 is because if she does get to the end, there is at least a shot that she wins, and she is one of the more developed characters on the season. So I had to put her that high solely because of that. But I don't think she's actually winning, so I had to put her here at number three. Now we're moving on to number two, and I feel like this top two is basically the number two and three spots from last week, just bumped up one to account for Evie being eliminated. But number two, we have Xander. Now, I've said before that I believed Xander would outlast Evie for a while now, and obviously now that has come to pass. And I feel like at this point, Xander might get to the end of the game. I mean, obviously, from a game position, like things weren't great for him in this episode. I mean, obviously, for one, he wins the immunity challenge, but then obviously he's on the teams with him and Evie. I mean, they definitely try hard to get the numbers on their side to blindside Liana. Come the tribal council, like he believes Deshaun is on their side, possibly even Danny, to the point where he doesn't even play his idol just in case, and that in turn causes Evie to go home. Now, I don't fault Xander too much for not using his idol there, as I think he probably would have been better off trying to hold on to it for the future, especially now considering that this probably wouldn't have caused much to really change the game. I mean, even if they gotten Liana out this round, there's no guarantees of him and Evie lasting through the next round. It's probably in his best interest to get through that round with both his extra vote and his idol. I actually forgot he had an extra vote at first. But again, I feel like going into this next round, I mean, I think he'll probably be picked up by Deshaun and possibly Danny to flip the game against the Chantelle contingent of the world. And with him still having an idol and an extra vote, I mean, he's definitely in a strong position to use those advantages to ensure that those big flips happen. And I think that's definitely something that will boon his game, definitely something that will propel him towards the end. And through that, I think that alone is probably probably elevate him to number two on this power ranking. But the reason I don't have a number one is because I'm not entirely sure if he wins a jury vote if he gets to the end. I mean, the fact that he is as young as he is will probably make it harder for him to garner the respect from a lot of the jury members. And when you factor that in with the fact that he's a straight white male, like, and the fact this season is all about diversity and how this cookout that Deshaun would probably be turning against is all about trying to get a black winner or a person of color to win. Like for all that to be dismantled just for a straight white guy to be handed the win is probably a hard sell for a lot of these people. And I think that will be a big challenge. However, if he is able to make some big moves along the way that could help push the needle in his favor, I mean, the reason I have him in number two is because I think, again, he has the most potential to play a strong game moving forward, even if that game does involve idols to a certain extent. So while he is on the bottom, like, and he's the one outside the core majority, I think that was to set up the possibility of a flip happening next round, and I think that flip will happen come next round. So that'll be very interesting to see. The one issue is, again, his pre-merge was so inconsistent content-wise that makes me pause when I think about how high he is on this list. I mean, it's crazy that he's as high as it is on his list. But then again, looking at the rest of the field, it's crazy that these people have gotten the edits that they've gotten this season, especially on a season of Survivor US. So I guess I had to put Xander here at number two. And now, at number one, the person I believe has the highest likelihood of winning Survivor 41 is Deshaun. Now, again, I don't think Deshaun has that great of a chance of winning this game. I mean, looking at his pre-merge, I mean, there isn't too much content-wise. I mean, compared to the rest of Luvu, he definitely has the most there to support a win. However, considering that Luvu was underrated in general, you would think that he would have at least gotten more content if he were a more traditional winner. Gameplay wise, I still think he's playing the best game. I mean, he definitely has the most connections on Luvu. And even throughout the merge, I mean, we've seen him being sort of the center of attention, aside from Chantelle in a lot of regards. So I think that part of his game is impressive. Although I will admit that this last few episodes have highlighted some of his more negative qualities, I think his whole feud with Chantelle has definitely painted him in a bit of a negative light. However, I think that a flip will happen, and that if a flip does happen, that he will be on the winning side of that, which in turn will make him more likely to get towards the end of the game. I think at the same time, he has plenty of allies he could work with that could help him get that far. People like Danny and people like Xander, possibly Ricard if Ricard is really intent on flipping on Chantelle, although that's not a guarantee. I think there are definitely a number of cases to support Deshaun getting towards the end. Now, will he win? I think there is a good chance of him doing so. Now, it's not a guarantee, but I think there is a good chance of doing that. And I will admit that even now, I'm still not super confident about this. I mean, really, like I said with this entire list, I'm not super confident about how the rest of this game will play out. I mean, it's very exciting to see just how jumbled a lot of these edits are to where I'm not entirely sure who's getting the traditional winner edit here. However, I think out of all the people in the game, Deshaun has the most there to support it, although there's still plenty of holes there. And I think he is playing the best game from a strict positioning standpoint. I think he will win his battle against Chantelle when he decides to flip. I think there's just the most there to support a Deshaun win. However, I will admit he's not perfect, and I could definitely see a downfall coming for him as well. However, that's probably not going to happen soon. All right, that will do it for this week's installment of the Survivor 41 Power Rankings. Now, I do have a bit of an announcement in that I will not be posting this next week. I will be traveling next week for Thanksgiving. However, I do plan to come back the Thursday after Thanksgiving, where I plan to do an updated Power Rankings accounting both episodes 10 and 11, so stay tuned for that. Now, of course, I have more videos coming down the line, so stay tuned for those. Be sure to like and subscribe. But for now, that is the video. See ya.